In this episode of the Facility Playbook, I got to sit down with Mike from Scheel's Soccer Complex.
My favorite thing is how Mike took his knowledge from the NFL and translated it into this huge soccer complex that's ultimately owned and operated by a Parks and Rec department. It's clear that Mike has some great knowledge around this, and he's able to turn this complex into the top soccer complex in the United States, and they've won a title around that. So if you're looking at learning how to run a huge soccer complex and how Mike has dealt with his issues around parking and how they've looked into food and beverage and what works the best for them, you're going to really enjoy this episode.
What's up, everybody? Do you own or manage a facility? Well, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Facility Playbook. I'm Luke Wade, founder and CEO of Facility Ally, and this podcast is about helping facility managers and owners learn from pioneers and veterans in the industry who have built and managed successful sports facilities, entertainment venues, and clubs. Did you know that most of those facilities I just mentioned use between 4 and 6 different softwares to manage their facilities? Facility Ally to the rescue. Revolutionize your facility with Facility Ally's all-in-one system. Learn more at facilityally.com. Speaking of facilities, we're at a mega facility here today, and I can't wait to introduce you to Mike LaPlante, manager of soccer operations here in Overland Park. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Luke.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you here? I know you've been here quite a while, but
Yeah.
before the world of Scheel's Soccer Complex,
Right.
where were you?
Very roundabout sort of way. Went to college in California. Decided to go to grad school when the sports marketing industry was kind of just taking off in the early 90s. Went to grad school in Florida. Did a bunch of internships down there. Moved to Dallas. Ended up getting a job doing special events for the NFL. Did that for 12 years. My wife was originally from here and wanted to get back, so we moved back up here, and that was in early 2006. And about that time, the city was working with Sporting KC, then the Wizards, and they were talking about building a facility with youth fields and all that stuff. So if anybody remembers, back in 2007, they had a bond initiative to build their stadium down at 159th and 69 Highway, which the city wasn't part of other than it was in their city limits. That did not pass because it involved raising the property taxes, and people voted that down. And the city immediately after that said, hey, maybe we can do something. And they got together in about 3 weeks. They had a plan, they had the financing, and they put the job offer, posted the job, and I'm like, I think I could do that. And in March of 2008, I was hired to run this place, and we opened in September of 2009. So it was a real quick construction, 32 months, and we opened and really kind of been learning ever since. So
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I didn't know you had a background with the NFL. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
And so has any of that knowledge transferred over to what you do today?
Yeah, the NFL kind of set the bar really high and for everything they do. The power of the shield, they used to call it. And, when I was looking at how to run this place, I used that experience, and I'd been to Disney and their fields at ESPN a number of times. And so I kind of used that as my frame of reference of what this could do and how to program it, how to monetize it. Taking care of it operationally was a whole different ballgame, but when you're trying to generate revenue streams, that's really where I came at it from. And I think it was unique at the time because everybody had 1 or 2 fields, but to have this many multi-purpose fields, rectangular, in one location was unique at that particular juncture in time.
Sure. So 15 years ago, it was pretty unique. And,
Right.
and still today, it's huge. So
Correct.
tell me a little bit about Scheel's Soccer Complex today, and maybe try to explain the enormity of this place.
Yeah, so we have 96 acres, which today, with some of the other facilities out there around the country, is probably would be considered small. But I think the advantage that we have compared to a lot of places that we're located right in the middle of everything. We're surrounded by homes and apartments and retail and commercial, and so the accessibility to our hotels and restaurants is unique because generally soccer facilities or any large facility is on the outskirts of town where there's the most availability of land. With that in mind, the traffic, 250,000 people going up and down the streets around here. every year, or every month, sorry, we're located next to another city facility, Deanna Rose Children's Farmstead on one side, St. Andrews Golf Course on another. So this corner, coupled with a softball complex, is heavily trafficked Monday through Friday, obviously, for a lot of reasons, but especially on weekends. So I think that's unique in and of itself when you look at us compared to a lot of other places. On top of that, when we opened, 12 contiguous fields, all synthetic, all with lights, was unheard of. And that in and of itself was something that appealed to their early users, to the folks that were coming here from other locations from the north because it was too cold, folks that were playing at other facilities because it was too wet, just the fact that you could play irregardless of the climate and play later into the night because we had lights. And so it was a combination of things that hit at the right time, coupled with Sporting Kansas City becoming their name change, the NWSL coming into town at that particular juncture with FC Casey, and it was just a perfect combination of events that led to tapping into that soccer popularity at the time.
So you mentioned 96 acres, 12 fields, all soccer, right? And the baseball across the street, that doesn't fall underneath you.
That does not fall into
So
us.
can you explain a little bit about, this is technically Overland Park. It's owned by the city of Overland Park,
Correct.
but are you a subset of the Parks and Rec department, or how does that directly connect to the Parks and Rec?
So yeah, I'm an employee of the city, and I fall under the Parks and Rec umbrella, just like the golf course would, and the pools, the rec centers, and things like that. So the benefit is that I have the resources of the city at my disposal. So whether it's public works for when it snows, whether it's the facilities, if we have something going on with one of the buildings, don't have to worry about HR or accounting or all that good stuff. But at the same time, we're relatively autonomous because we're considered an enterprise fund. So all the money I make, I keep. It doesn't go back to the general fund. So I have to be able to fulfill my financial obligations operationally. Plus, since I get to keep the money I make over and above my budget, I have to pay for everything that I do, repair-wise or upgrades and things of that sort. Now, I have the benefit of the city behind me if I don't have that, but the goal is to be self-sufficient. And that's where the challenge really comes in.
Sure. And in 15 years, how's it going so far?
We've been really fortunate from that standpoint. I mean, it's like everybody knows, the prices, especially in the last 2 years, have changed the dynamic with cost increases. And we're able to roll with that a lot, but at the same time, that's the challenge because, again, you're still talking youth sports, and you've got to be really cognizant of not pricing your availability for the product that you're trying to offer, which is field rental in our particular case, so far out that people can't afford it. And that's a challenge for a lot of sports because youth sports has become more and more expensive, and it's become more year-round. And so we try to have some semblance of balance. It doesn't always work out well, but that's the goal at least.
Sure. That's awesome. So 12 full-size turf soccer fields. What is your biggest challenge day to day?
Weather. Weather, and we have over the course of the calendar year, we'll have 18 to 20 tournaments. We'll have the weekends that we don't have tournaments, we'll have league play going on. Monday through Thursday, we have practice from 4 till 10 o'clock. You couple all that with the activity over the summer, which is camps, adult play, things of that nature, which will run from 6:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. So you add all that up, and generally, and very conservatively, we estimate we get about 1.2 million people through here a year. So with that in mind, Friday, you're done cleaning up. Monday, you start cleaning up. And, cleanup is, mowing and trash and putting everything back. And just like when you have the family over at Thanksgiving, get the house back in order because you have guests coming again the next weekend. So that's our biggest challenge. And because it is a nice, appealing location, we want kids to be able to come here and kick around during the summer when not out causing trouble. We have a skate park, so that's always busy. The basketball courts are always busy, the tennis courts and the pickleball courts. So it's not just the soccer component of it. And even when we don't have soccer going on, we've got lacrosse because lacrosse is really looking for space. and summer is one of the only times we can offer them availability. And so, we just transition between the sports primarily more often than not.
Sure. So you said 1.2 million. That's probably why you guys were named the top soccer complex in the United States.
Yeah, and that was a great honor. And again, I think it's a testament to the location, the availability of amenities, and kind of what we started off hoping to build, and it's transformed into that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about you being centralized in the city. 15 years ago was, obviously we've grown a lot as a city of Kansas City Metro and Overland Park. Was there this many houses and this much stuff going around it 15 years ago, or did it kind of just spring up around it?
Yeah, that, it's funny because, so where we are right now was actually 3 holes of the golf course. So when they took the big puzzle and they took the puzzle pieces apart, they said, okay, well, we need to take these 3 holes away from the golf course. We'll build 3 new holes at the golf course, and then we'll add some other amenities to the golf course. We had to take 2 of the fields from the baseball side, which was owned by the city at that particular time, gave those to our neighbors next door, the other 2, and we took that to make the parking lots in the building where we sit. There was 3 fields on the corner of 135th and Schweitzer, which were city-owned again, and they reconfigured those. So there was a movement of stuff just in this little space. And then the apartment complexes across the street on both sides next to Blue Valley Northwest. All the retail that you see, the Casey's, Coaches, all that stuff, none of that was here. And so that, were we the cause? I don't think 100%, but it didn't hurt because you were bringing traffic. And our relationship, I think, with Scheel's is a perfect example of that too, because where they are down the road, they looked at that and they knew the proximity to the soccer complex, and the traffic for their type of clientele would be consistent.
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't help to have 1.2 million people drive by your front door or around you, right, as a business. So that's great. You mentioned temperature was weather being one of the biggest problems, and we're in the middle of this insane heat wave. I think it's supposed to get like 108 today. I don't even know.
Right.
So maybe talk about that. You said you had a challenge this weekend with that for the first time ever. So maybe let's talk about how that heat weather and the heat was a big challenge and what you guys did to.
Yeah. Well, since we're all synthetic, that's always been the big knock, right? It's just not as cool as natural turf. And people are 100% right. It's just the nature of that beast. But with the weather that we've had to deal with the cold probably more than the heat. Kansas isn't known for being that hot, right? So, we learned early on that when it snowed, you can clear these, get a plow out there. There's a way to do it. But it's not ideal because of what it does. It doesn't necessarily tear up the turf, but the infill, the black rubber that's in there that makes it as soft as it is, does get rolled up in that snow. And then you have just these huge piles of black snow everywhere. And then, as everybody knows, typically when it snows, it's even colder the next day. So we had piles of hard snow right off the field. And so there's a safety issue there. And then we learned that, we let Mother Nature do her thing. We can get about 3 inches of melt a day as long as there's no north wind and it's about 35 degrees. So in 2 days, you can get it done. With the heat, there was theories as this evolved over time that, you water it and it'll cool it, which it's true, but is what it does. It actually increases the humidity that comes off the field and it evaporates within 30 minutes, so you're right back where you started. So really, there's been an educational process that starts with us working with the clubs, who work with the teams, who work with the players to say, look, you got to be hydrated, you got to be smart, you can't run a 90-minute training session like you normally would. You have to take water breaks, you have to bring towels, you have to be prepared to deal with this, and you can do it. I think it's harder on the spectators and the referees just because they don't have that, and even the coaches because they're standing out there for a longer time too. So there's been an evolution based off of experience and lessons learned that we try to pass along to people maybe who aren't familiar with it, or people who are coming from out of town that don't have to experience that on a daily basis like we do. And that's been the biggest, that's probably the biggest hurdles. And it happens every summer. We always have that one spell where it's really, really hot. We'll go into November. Last November, if you remember, we had that freak cold snap, and it was really, really, really cold. And as uncomfortable it is to be out there when it's hot, it's actually more uncomfortable when it's cold, just because you're standing on a block of ice for all intents and purposes. So, we get both extremes.
Sure. So with it being, cold, how are you able to program this facility year round? Do you only operate in certain months? Do you shut down for a season? How does that work?
Well, we're fortunate that we have our season typically will run, for example, we're in the middle of the fall season, we'll call it August 1 to December 15th, and that takes care of all of our tournaments and our league play. Starting about that time, teams typically go inside, but again, what was it, a year or two ago, we only had like 2 or 3 inches. Even this past winter, we only had 8. So people will schedule 1 or 2 practices, a lot more low-keyed, in preparation for when the season starts in about March 1. So weather permitting, we have practices as long as the fields are cleared. We are pretty much still full Monday through Thursday. Not as much on the weekends anymore, but that time period, people have learned to duplicate what they do inside and bring it outside and give the kids a chance to play on the bigger surfaces again so that they can be prepared for when their seasons pick back up again in the spring. So we're fortunate.
I was going to say, there's really no downtime. You got January, February, March. I mean, people are here playing.
Christmas and 4th of July, we say, are about the only downtimes.
That's so unique for an outdoor facility.
Yeah.
I know that's a lot of them struggle with, even we run sand volleyball leagues on the riverfront, and it's April through October, and that's it. There's no sand volleyball revenue through the winter at all.
Right.
So it's amazing you guys have been able to do that. So how important, obviously I didn't see a restaurant or a kitchen directly on site. How important is food and beverage to you guys, and how do you manage that?
So, when this was being designed, I had this great idea, having been to some facilities, that I wanted to get away from the quote-unquote traditional hamburger hot dog mentality. And we have 3 concession stands here, which again is unique. We don't have any portalettes, so all internal bathrooms through brick and mortar and stuff like that. So that maintains the cleanliness of the facility. But the idea was probably a little bit ahead of its time. And I learned really quickly that soccer games are so transitionary. You come, you only have 10, 15-minute halftime, second half, and then you're gone. It's not like baseball where it drags out a while and you can go between innings and you can still watch the game. And so the idea was sound. It's just the execution of it from a quick serve standpoint. You can't have an elaborate meal prep time. And so we used a third party. We took it back in-house and we simplified the menu. Went nachos, pretzels, hamburgers, hot dogs, real simple stuff. And that worked really, really well. As time has evolved and more restaurants have come into play, or in more convenience stores, it's actually changed the dynamic within the last 3 years, especially since COVID. People just know that if they want to get, it's an amenity, really. It's not a service, it's turning into an amenity. So it's water, Gatorade, maybe some candy or chips for the kids, but that's really about it. And so we are actually in the process of reevaluating what we want our concessions and food service component to be in the next 10, 15 years. And that's something that we're analyzing now and trying to figure out what do we want to be, what do we think we need to do to provide that service, and how do we go about executing that.
Sure. And so obviously being a part of the city, you guys work well with the community and are working on that, which is awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your stay to play arrangement with the city?
Yeah, so stay to play, again, when we started, that was kind of the buzzword of the time, right? If you're going to play at this particular facility, you need to stay in town. And our partnership with the hoteliers, because the hoteliers, based on the increase, we increased the hotel bed tax 3% and went from 6 to 9% in order to back the bonds that we got to build the facility. And the idea was that anybody who comes here to play has to stay in Overland Park hotels. Sounds good, looked good on paper and all that other stuff, but you got to be able to execute it to drive that compression. And when you're dealing with Chiefs games, with races at the Speedway, with any number, weddings, graduations, any number of events, hoteliers are looking to maximize that room rate as much as they can. And soccer parents are pretty savvy, especially if they have to go around the country, and having done it for 16 years with my kids, you find loopholes, and people started finding loopholes. So even though our hotels were full, they also realized that yeah, it's great to have a full hotel, but it's really painful to have a full hotel of a bunch of 10 and 12-year-old kids running around your hallways all the time. So there was recently a kind of, again, a recalibration of that and a reaffirmation with our hoteliers, working with our Visitor and Conventions Bureau, to try to really do that in a way that everybody benefited. So just this past spring, we put a new pricing structure into place that will actually go into effect in 2024, that gave an incentive to the tournament operators and the rights holders to bring in out-of-town teams, and they would get a declining rebate based off of their rental. So there'll be a base rate, and based off of the number of hotel rooms, it'll go down. The more room nights you bring in, the lower your overall rental will be. So it's, again, it works in favor of the hoteliers because they're filling their hotels. It works in favor of the tournament directors because they're paying less. It works in our favor because we're creating more transient guest tax. The only person it doesn't help is me, because then my bottom line, I'm getting less money. However, with that in mind, in conversations with our council and educating them on the theory and the thought process that we were implementing, they saw the benefit because there's a greater upside on the economic impact than there is the actual dollars in hand from a rental. So it's taken a while, and it's something that we have tried to massage, and I think we finally settled on something where everybody wins, especially the tournament folks, because they're their driver in that. Even though they work with the third-party housing company, we've got them on board to help them understand what we're trying to achieve, because if they fill Overland Park hotel rooms, then the tournament operators are making more money, paying less on the rental, and everybody wins. So
that's awesome. It sounds like a very complicated partnership to work with so many different groups, and to be able to recognize, I call it a win-win-win. Obviously, you had more than three people there,
right.
And so we always look at things, if my customers aren't winning, if I'm not winning, and the partnership I'm working on aren't winning, it's not a win for everybody. Right. So it's really, congratulations. It sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
And like you said, to be able to explain that in a way to the city to understand, like, yeah, we're getting less money here, but it's actually impacting everything else in a positive way.
Right.
That's awesome. So do you own any of your own programming, or are you just purely renting space?
Yeah, no, we just straight rental. We say we unlock the doors and make sure the place doesn't burn down. That's a real oversimplification of the process. We looked at having programming, but because of our partnerships with Heartland Soccer Association, which runs leagues, with Sporting Blue Valley, which is one of the local clubs, they have a rec league, with the tournament operators that already had pre-established tournaments, we just determined, we were coming into a space where the wheel was already created. And so we would just be really, really fighting an uphill battle to try to take over something or even become active in a space that was really established already. So we made a determination that the partnership route was going to be better for everybody than it was to be a competitor.
I love that. Partnerships is one of my favorite things. And speaking of that, you talked a little about the hotel partnerships. You also have some hospital partnerships and some cool sponsorship programs. Can we talk about that? How did the hospitals get involved, and what does your sponsorship program look at from a city level?
Right. So the sponsorship was kind of one of the things when I was interviewing for this job. I had this grand idea because there are assets out here that lend value to the local community, whether businesses, restaurants, or whoever it might be. And we had a really good initial partnership. It was originally with HCA, and that was just expired a year or two ago. Now we have a partnership with Advent Health. And, with all our partners out here, whether it's Advent, whether it's Go Car Wash, Tide Cleaners, our naming sponsor was Scheel's All Sport, those are really meant to intertwine with what they're trying to do in the community. And you talk to all three of those, and it's always like, we want to have a presence. We want people to know that we're here. We want to be able to help them with whatever drives they've got going on to raise funds. They're the type of businesses that want to do that. We also have the local mom and pops, whether it's a deli or the real estate agent and things like that, to where we had to create a sponsorship level that their marketing budgets could handle. So we have banner rates for $600 for a season or $800 for the year. And in the overall marketing budget, that's pretty nominal. So if they get one return on that ROI, then it's definitely paid for itself. And So that's what I tell them. I said, look, a banner's a banner, and it's just going to be a matter of how much that resonates with the person when they walk by. So we try not to get them too convoluted in there. I don't place any limitations on, other than size, what they do graphically and how they want to do it. We try to lend a partnership for them with Heartland Soccer Association because they have the tournaments, so if they want to get in player bags and things like that. So we have a kind of an understanding with Heartland, with stuff like that. And that's where if somebody wants to get literature into somebody's hands, I say, well, you're better off probably going with Heartland because you can touch more people that way. At the same time, if you just want to advertise, this is what I can bring to the table. So it's evolved over time, and we've gone through a couple economic ups and downs where people have more money to spend at one time, or sometimes they don't. So hospitals were easy. We've been looking for that phone tech thing for a while, and it just hasn't worked out. Vehicles, we've looked at a couple times too. 96 acres sounds like a lot, but we're so condensed, and when you get 10 or 15,000 people on here, there's only so many places that you can put things where they're not going to get hit by a soccer ball. And so we kind of run into some hurdles with some of that stuff, and we try to, do a trial run, see if it works, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure. And so you have the Scheel's name obviously on the whole soccer complex, and you've got some banners. Any thoughts around why you've thought about field naming rights and things like that?
Yeah, and we do have some of that. The price points on that stuff, we've got to make it worthwhile for those guys, but we've also got to make sure that there's some longevity with some of that stuff. So the ones that we do have, Tide being one that's been here forever, Scheel's, the hospitals and things like that. But those, run anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 a year, and so that's a big chunk of the marketing budget for folks. And we were putting our price points together at a time that we thought that those were reasonable asks. That's rate card. So a lot of it just depends on the person, what they think they're looking to do, how long they're here. Tide's a perfect example. Those folks had kids that played here. They were here all the time. They have multiple locations around the city, and so that was their way of giving back to the community because they knew what we were doing, putting it back into the fields and making sure everything was nice for their kids to have a place to play. They felt that was like their contribution, even though it was coming through their business, and it's been a great partnership from that standpoint. Scheel's, again, they're a family-owned, private, sporting goods store, and their whole philosophy has always been built around community. So it just was perfect aligning of the stars that the store and the complex were so close together, too. And we were looking for naming rights at that particular juncture.
And we haven't talked about values very much, but it sounds like you're finding a lot of partners and a lot of sponsors and a lot of meshes that all go back to your value, which is helping the community.
Right. As a city facility, right, and we are beholden to the taxpayers, obviously, and trying to be good stewards of the money that we're given. And just like our pools, just like the farmstead, just like the golf course, we're an amenity for the local community. We just have the benefit of extending that bubble a little bit wider because we do bring in so much out-of-town business. We are a destination, and that's one of the things that we are working with the CVB to do is that if we're a destination, what other components of the city do we bring to the table that people can visit as part of that destination? The farmer's market, Prairie Fire, whatever it may be. So we're learning, and you got to have the right people at the forefront to kind of promote that, because I'm so singularly focused on making sure this is ready Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and getting it ready Monday through Thursday, that helping that evolve is difficult. And it's getting people into the room and everybody pulling in the same direction. And we're getting to that now where we haven't been in years past.
So we've talked about a lot of challenges, obviously working in a government, a Parks and Rec department. Typically there's a lot of transition or changeover, but you've been here 15 years. So what's one of the reasons you feel like you've stuck it out this long and why you like staying here?
Oh, I think there's probably it won't run without me kind of mentality, which I know isn't true. This was a flyer for me when I took it. I had a background in events. I knew how to do a lot of that stuff, but facility in the bigger picture was where my steepest learning curve was. I had a crash course in turf technology. 2 years ago, I learned about asphalt technology, which was a whole nother, laying asphalt and stuff like that, and building maintenance and facilities and things. So I think it's just been one of those things where as time has evolved, Do I stay here because I love it? Yeah, and this is where my kids grew up. My kids started playing here. I got a picture in my office on our grand opening, and now they're both, one's graduated from college and one's going to graduate from college. So, I see some of that. There's kids that were here when I opened, and now they're bringing their kids here, which is frightening. So,
so cool.
it's one of those things, and I think there's a part of me too that wants to compete against those bigger guys. I don't want this to be the D2 site. I want it to be the D1 site. And so there's a little bit of pride that comes with that. The guys that work with me kind of feel the same way. And we're a small staff, but we do a lot with very little. We do a lot ourselves. And I think that's what helps too.
Sure. How, in that period of time, how have you seen the soccer industry change?
Yeah, that's, the sport has grown significantly. I had the benefit of traveling with my girls to a lot of different facilities around the country. The first hour I was there is all I was doing was walking around and evaluating what they had, what I didn't have, what did they do, look like they were doing well versus maybe what they weren't doing well. And size always kind of lends itself to awesome, right? And then as time has gone on, I've realized that we have this nice little compact entity that really lends itself to the intimacy of a tournament as long as everybody's behaving. And people come here and they're like, this is just absolutely amazing. Because again, if you think of most soccer complexes, they're in a park, right? And it's beautiful. You got trees and next to the river or wherever it is, but it's just a wide open space without any confinement. This is really dedicated to the game, to those kids coming in and having the best experience they can. And I know, and I always ask my girls, I'm like, what was it like? And they're like, it's like nothing else. And even they both played in college. It's like, your facility is still better than anywhere we go. And that's what I like to hear. And I said, well, what's better? And they're like, it's clean, it lends itself to the atmosphere that you're looking for when you're coming to a soccer facility. And that's what we hope to achieve. And even for the lacrosse guys, it's different because it's intimate and you're in one space and it's all about you and that sport at that particular time.
That's awesome. So you mentioned lacrosse and soccer. Anything outside of those two that you've done here?
No, because we're so packed with soccer. I mean, it's unfortunate. We joked early on, and I realized by year 3 that we probably could have had more fields. And it just lacrosse is at that stage where soccer was 20 years ago. They're looking to find the space so they can grow the sport, and we may eventually get there. It's just hard because soccer here is, like I said, the defined season, but even outside the defined season, there's still a lot of soccer going on, even with the other facilities coming up around the city.
Sure. What's one of the coolest solutions or something you've implemented in this space that you were like, wow, I'm glad I figured that out, or that was really neat that we figured that out as a team?
I think for us, we have a running joke around here. As long as the bathrooms are clean, then mom's happy. And we can't control the weather. We can't control the refs. There's a lot of things we can't control. But if we can do that, keep it picked up, keep it clean, keep it nice curb appeal, then a lot of other stuff takes care of itself. And like I said, I've got 2 guys that work for me that are phenomenal. And even our part-time guys who have been with us for years and years, they understand, what it means. We try to be really cognizant of the experience. We don't like people when they kind of get out of hand. So we have a lot of rules that a lot of places might not have. We don't want animals inside. Just it creates potential problems. And I realize people like to travel with their dog, but it's still synthetic turf, and we can't really handle that like you could with a natural surface. So it's just little stuff like that, I think, that's kind of evolved, and we don't apologize for it because I think the experience at the end of the day is what really matters, so that people say, we want to go back there next year.
Sure. Did you have the dog rule from day one, or did you learn the hard way?
No, we learned, we did put that up, from day one, and so, it's, sometimes you have to be a little bit flexible, but,
And that's unique, actually. I wouldn't have thought of that. Is there any other rules that maybe are unique to your facility or something like that you think is one of the reasons that maybe people look as a negative, but it creates a positive experience?
Well, the whole sunflower seed thing, right?
Oh, okay.
No
sunflower
seeds.
seeds?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that doesn't mean it's actually followed.
Sure.
Signs are just a recommendation. They're not a rule. So, but those are small little problems, in the grand scheme of things. And it's one of the things that we have to deal with, and most people are pretty good, and we're not afraid to say, look, we want you to come enjoy it, but this is why it is. And most people are like, okay, I understand. And so as long as we go about approaching it correctly, then hopefully it works out in the end.
Sure. So if it all started over today, what would you do differently?
Oh yeah, that's the favorite question that people always ask when they're saying, hey, I've got some space, what would you do different? And I don't know if there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of little operational things that we wouldn't have known when it was being designed. The parking flow is probably one of them. This place was designed with 1,100 parking spaces and grass parking to offset that. So that's 95 spaces typically per field, which is more than is recommended by, whatever the governing parking rules are. But the thought process of when you break those fields down into small-sided, now all of a sudden you've got 2 teams on a field, and then mom and dad are coming in separate cars, and grandma and grandpa are coming in their own cars. So now we've gone from 1 parking space for that player to 3. So it gets really, really, really crowded. And then our entrance and our egress, going out to major streets, having to deal with stop signs. I don't think you could have done a lot different, but I would have looked at that if I had known, had a frame of reference. Because again, when you go to most facilities, they're gravel and it's just wide open, right? Yeah. So, but I always say, what do you do when you go to a Chiefs game? What do you do when you go to the mall during the Christmas? I mean, it's the same idea. I've come here for 15 years, and if I ever need a parking spot by my field, I usually find it within like 2 minutes. So that's one thing. I would have probably looked at doing some different stuff with the building that we're in, just because I know how it can lend an appeal, even though we've got some great positives that come with it. But I think it could have lent to the experience if the back was glass, and opened up and just made that whole thing a lot more visually aesthetic. But again, you have a finite budget and you can only do certain things. And that's the hard part. I mean, this whole complex was $36 million, and we spent all $36 million at the time. And there was a lot of value engineering that had to come out of it. But at the same time, it had to appeal to the look that met the vision that those folks had at that particular time.
Sure. And so the 12 soccer fields, we're sitting in the field house. There's also some training areas in the field house. How does that tie into what you do?
Right. So the field house is 16,000 square feet. So we have our offices up here. Then we have a first floor tenant space and a second floor tenant space. So second floor is local club, Sporting Blue Valley. Again, synergy made sense to have a soccer club here. The first floor space is technically 2 spaces. And early on, I was introduced to Scott Moody, and he was at another facility, and I said, hey, come take a look at this and see if that's something that you would want to do. And it's essentially a gym, to oversimplify it, but it's a training ground for primarily soccer, but all athletes. And that has evolved in the 15 years that he's been here to where it was, heavy in the iron and weights and all this other stuff. And now it's translated to really help soccer players become better athletes, to help prepare the young ones for the rigors of the game, introduce them to the world of weights and nutrition and development, and then the older players come back from college and train in the summer or in the off season. The more elite players are getting specific training to help them achieve their goals of going to college. So there's just been a lot, and I've learned a lot from him, having my daughters go through that and kind of philosophically and stuff like that. And so when you look at it again, you talk the synergies and the relationships and partnerships, Sporting Blue Valley and him, it just made sense, and it worked out well.
That's awesome. So been here 15 years. What's the next 3 years look like?
The next 3 years are busy. We're going to get LED lights in the spring, which is, those weren't really around in 2009, and those have evolved in their efficiencies and all that stuff. We're hosting the 2024 and 25 and 26, 24 and 25 U.S. Youth Midwest Regionals in June. So those will be 250-ish teams that will be here for a week, looking to qualify for the national championships for USU Soccer, which is a big deal because we hosted the nationals last time in 2019, and then we were supposed to host them in 20, and that got canceled. Turf replacement in 27 and 28, and then by then I'll be thinking about what am I going to do before I retire, so I don't know.
Well, are you going to get any of the World Cup stuff that's coming?
So, don't know yet. In the next, I think last I heard in September, they'll have a tentative schedule of games, game times, not necessarily who's playing where, and they will, I think they were going to announce who's going to house out of which cities as their home base. So once that comes out, that will help us have a general idea of who's going to be staying in town, when the game times are going to be. But again, you're going to have a lot of people traveling from around the world, and so it'll be interesting. We're kind of having some preliminary discussions on what that would look like, but it's really in the down season.
Sure.
Latter part of June and July are quiet because everybody goes on vacation, right? And so are people going to still want to go to the lake when all that activity is going on in town? I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't
mean,
think so
it
either.
happens here. And
Yeah.
we've never had it before. I would hope that people.
Yeah, and and if you think back to when it was here, what it was that back in '84 or whenever, a long time ago. That's when soccer kind of got that uptick, and it'll be interesting to see how much of an uptick there is in participation in the game and people being introduced to it for the first time, and showcasing the city itself to a lot of people who may have heard about it but didn't really believe it, because there's a lot of soccer in this town.
Sure. Yeah, it's getting bigger and bigger. I
Yeah.
see it all the time. Well, I got one more question, but before we do, got to remind everybody to check out Facility Ally. If you want to revolutionize your facility, all-in-one systems for reservations, leagues, camps, clinics, memberships, and more. Check it out at facilityally.com. And then you mentioned 27-28 turf replacement. Are you going to change anything or put the exact same thing in, or maybe there's new technology by then? Or
there's some new technology out there. Actually, that's on my to-do list to start having those discussions with those guys since we're far enough out. It does take me about 2 years to kind of educate myself with the different technologies, the pros and cons of stuff. It's a really simple thing, but there's a lot of science in it, and I'm sure it's evolved since 17 and 18 when was the last time we did it. So we'll just have to wait and see what kind of new bells and whistles they have, if anything, that could help make it even better.
Sure. Well, thank you for all you do for the city. Really, really appreciate it. Love it. And thanks for being on today, the Facility Playbook.
No, appreciate it very much.
We'll see you next time.